this was in 1989, beggars appeared for the first time on the streets. Cambridge wasn't terribly rich then, but it was a profoundly shocking experience to the sort of people who lived here.
Selwyn Image was a volunteer in a night shelter in Cambridge in 1990, and that the night shelter was thinking of expanding, and Selwyn, being marketing, thought, I'll just market research, spoke to a few homeless people, one of whom said, I don't want a blank night shelter, I want a home and work. And Selwyn had been a volunteer in Emmaus in France in the 60s, and he thought, let's see if it still exists. Could we introduce it into England?
Somebody rang me up and said, would I do a fundraising job for the mayor of Cambridge? And I remember him saying to me, have you heard of Emmaus? And I hadn't, didn't mean anything to me. And he mentioned Abbé Pierre, the founder. And then he mentioned somebody by the name of Selwyn Image. And he said that Selwyn had approached him about starting Emmaus in this country. And it was giving home and work to homeless people.
With Selwyn and others, we set up the committee and we looked for property in the area. Having been an architect, I was able to help in that way. And we formed a committee there, and that was the very beginning of Emmaus. And I was able to help with the setting up of the first place.
So the three of us worked in very differing roles, but there was a sort of alchemy between us, and we got on brilliantly and helped to inspire other people, which is what it was about.
There was a very strong driving team, people like Selwyn Image, Ian McKechnie-Jarvis, that really wanted this concept to work because they'd seen it be very successful in France and wanted to replicate it here because they'd seen the advantages that it gives to people.
At that time, they had found a property, just two L-shaped barns in the middle of a field, and I remember going to see it, and everything was overgrown. It was extremely dilapidated, but it was in about 2.5 acres of land, and I think we were allowed to build on about half an acre.
It was an awful lot smaller. I was very sceptical about what it was. Physically, the shop was probably a quarter of the size that it is now. The accommodation block wasn't. We lived in caravans, mobile homes out the back. There was 5 of us, I think, 5 or 6 when I first got here. It was a very different place to what you see in front of you today. However, it was a very exciting time because we were the pioneers, we were the first community, we were this unknown entity that Emmaus is. I'm not even entirely sure that everyone here knew exactly what they were buying into at the time.
One might say I found myself homeless for 5 years, at least kept in situations where there were no home comforts.
The Emmaus community has changed tremendously since I knew it, from just a handful of people struggling to get started to what you see today, which is a flourishing community with books, with records, with furniture. Today, you can hardly stop any Cambridge resident in the street who didn't know what Emmaus is. It's an active, lively community, part of the wider community, serving the local community. And those points are critically important.
They catch Emmaus rather like a virus, and then they suddenly see what it's about. And instead of being sort of unwilling receivers of government bounty, they actually become philanthropists. They decide where the surplus money goes. They decide. They feel huge, and rightly so, at being able to help somebody now less fortunate than themselves. And that was Abbé Pierre's whole idea, that you actually do something. It's actually looking outwards, working outwards, and, taking it forward. And then anybody can do it at any level. While we were getting the Cambridge community off the ground, people in Coventry, Dover, Greenwich and Brighton were inspired by the Emmaus model and wanting to open their own communities. And that's how Emmaus has spread, from those early days in a muddy field in Cambridge Hundreds of previously homeless men and women are now rebuilding their lives in Emmaus communities across the UK.